On a gray and dreary afternoon, Oliver returned home from school, his backpack heavy and his mind buzzing with thoughts of the day. He had finished a math test that morning, and it hadn't gone well. As he approached the familiar path leading up to his house, a sense of unease settled in his stomach, like a butterfly caught in a jar. He tried to shake off the feeling as he walked, kicking a pebble along the sidewalk, but the wind howled through the twisted branches of the nearby trees, making the air feel colder. Dark clouds rolled in above, casting unsettling shadows across the path. The sun struggled to break through, giving everything an eerie, muted hue that made him squint his eyes. When Oliver reached the front porch, a shiver ran down his spine. The door, usually welcoming with its chipped teal paint and crooked welcome mat, stood ajar, swinging slightly in the wind. An ancient creak echoed in the stillness as he pushed the door open wider, the hinges protesting like they hadn't been used in years. The familiar scent of home, lavender air freshener and the musty warmth of old wood, was replaced by an unsettling emptiness that clawed at his senses. A cold draft swept past him, almost like icy fingers brushing against his skin, making him hesitate at the threshold. Inside, the house was a grotesque shell of its former self. The living room, once filled with the cheerful chatter and laughter of family gatherings, was completely devoid of its furniture. All that was left were the shadows of what had been, faded imprints on the carpet where couches used to sit, and the outlines of chairs etched into the dust. The walls, stripped of pictures and colors, felt oppressive, as if they were pressing in, eager to swallow him whole. An overwhelming silence filled the space, sending a chill of dread crashing over him. Despite the echoing void, it felt as if he was being watched by unseen eyes lurking in the dark corners. Fearing his imagination had taken flight, Oliver called out for his parents, trying to hold onto the thread of hope that they might be nearby. "Mom? Dad?" His voice quivered, barely breaking through the heavy silence, but there was no answer, only the silence that seemed to swallow him whole. Stepping further inside, the empty room swallowed him like a cavernous maw. With each creaking floorboard beneath his feet, the house seemed to grow darker and more ominous, the shadows shifting as he moved. He peered into the dining room, his heart racing in his chest. The table was missing, leaving just a lonely chandelier hanging in the gloom like a sinister specter. Dust clung to the air, swirling in the remnants of the fading light. Every familiar object had vanished, leaving behind an unsettling emptiness that felt like it was waiting to consume him. The ghostly echoes of laughter from family dinners and birthday parties haunted the air, replaced now by an oppressive weight that made it hard to breathe. Determined to find a clue, Oliver wandered through the kitchen, hoping against hope to discover even a stray dish or a forgotten piece of home, a lingering memory clinging to the corners. Instead, he was met with barren countertops, cabinets swinging open like gaping mouths, and an eerie stillness that felt suffocating. The refrigerator stood silent, locked tight as if it were hiding secrets he wasn't meant to see. Feeling thoroughly confused yet increasingly anxious, Oliver decided to search upstairs. With a pounding heart, he ventured into the dim hallway, where the wallpaper peeled away, a sad reminder of the vibrant home it once was. Dark shapes loomed in the corners of his vision, making him shudder. He hesitated outside his own room, a tingle of instinct urging him to turn back, but curiosity gripped him firmly. What was happening? Where were his parents? He pushed the door open, only to be met with the sight of a hollow space. His belongings were absent, and the walls felt unholy, like a deranged version of what they had once been. Peer into the corner of the room, he noticed a jagged piece of paper, crumpled and oddly conspicuous against the bare floor. With trembling hands, he carefully unfolded it. The words were hastily scrawled, almost chaotic. "Leave while you can." The ominous message sent his heart racing, a quick drumbeat of fear echoing in his chest. He scrambles back, colliding with the dresser and sending a vase crashing to the ground. It shattered, the sound reverberating like an ominous thunderclap, making the hairs on the back of his neck stand on end. Oliver froze, dread pooling in his stomach. But as fear threatened to freeze him in place, Oliver's curiosity burned stronger than any fright. Surely, there must be a reasonable explanation for all of this. Maybe his parents were playing a prank, or perhaps they had forgotten to pick him up from school and gone to the store. Clenching the crumpled paper tightly in his fist, he gathered his courage and decided it was best to search for them. Leaving his empty room behind, he felt an unsettling sensation trickling down his spine, a warning to hurry and be cautious. With every step down the creaking staircase, the air grew thicker, heavy with tension. As he reached the bottom, he heard it. A guttural whisper, low and menacing, echoed through the hall, sending chills racing through his body. It was a sound he couldn't quite place, but it was enough to freeze him in his tracks. Suddenly, his football, which had been resting by the front door, slid across the floor, pushed by some unseen force, like a chilling invitation, beckoning him deeper into the hollow house. The creaks underfoot morphed into a symphony of eerie whispers, twisting his stomach into knots of dread. Panic mixed with curiosity, forcing Oliver to take a cautious step forward. He felt as if the house had become alive, its walls breathing around him. Shadows danced along the surfaces, and for a moment, he could swear he saw figures flitting just out of his line of sight. The walls seemed to close in, pressing against him, making him feel small and vulnerable. The instinct to flee was strong, almost overwhelming, but the desire to discover the truth was even stronger. The sound of the whispers intensified, dragging him further into the depths of the home. As he entered the living room again, he was struck by the chilling realization that the warm familiarity of home had transformed into something foreign and sinister. Discarded memories filled the space with an unsettling energy, the laughter of past gatherings replaced with an ominous stillness. The shadows pooled deeper in the corners, making them seem almost alive, as if they were waiting for him to make a mistake. "No," he shouted suddenly, his voice cracking in desperation. "Where are you, Mom? Dad?" He hoped that shouting would somehow summon them back, but only silence met his pleas. Taking a small step forward, he noticed a flicker of light coming from the other side of the room. It danced nervously, like the glow of a candle about to be snuffed out. Heart pounding in his chest, he approached the source. Each step felt like he was walking closer to the bubbling center of a storm, uncertainty electrifying the air around him. The light flickered again, and he could almost see the outlines of his family sitting at the dining table, sharing a meal filled with laughter. But then the vision faded, swallowed by darkness, leaving behind nothing but shadows and that eerie whisper that still clung to the air. Oliver took a deep breath, fighting back the rising tide of panic. He would not let fear control him. He would not be a prisoner in his own home. Clenching the crumpled paper tighter, he made his way toward the flickering light, determined to uncover whatever was hiding just out of reach. As he stepped closer, the atmosphere shifted, and the shadows seemed to lurch backward, as if sensing his determination. "Whatever you are," Oliver said, his voice steadier than he felt, "I'm not afraid of you." The words fell into the silence like stones in still water, rippling outward but meeting nothing in return. Suddenly, the light dimmed abruptly, plunging him into darkness once more. His heart raced as he felt a cold air swirl around him, like the very essence of fear. He stepped back, more cautious this time, his breath hanging in the stillness. Just when he thought he might turn and run, he heard a low chuckle, a sound that curled around him like smoke, turning his veins to ice. But fear wasn't going to win out today. Oliver's spirit flared bravely in the face of that laughter. "I will find my family," he called into the darkness, his resolve solidifying into determination. "And if there's something here, I'll uncover it. You can't scare me away." In that moment, the whispering stopped, and for a fleeting second, the house seemed to breathe a sigh, almost as if it were acknowledging his courage. Then, the ground beneath him shifted, and Oliver lost his balance, falling against the wall. The house sighed once more, this time like a giant releasing a long-held breath. With renewed resolve, he got back on his feet, shoving the fear deep down inside. Oliver glanced around the empty space again, searching for any glimmer, any sign that his family was near. The fleeting flicker of light danced in his mind, and he felt the urge to explore without looking back. He had to find out where it came from. Fighting the fears that clawed at him, he took a deep breath and slowly made his way toward the shadowy corners, determined to reveal whatever darkness lay hidden. The exploration of the shadows and the secrets they held was only just beginning. Although uncertainty loomed like a thick fog, he was ready. Ready to chase away the dark, ready to reclaim his home, and ready to uncover the truth behind the chilling whispers. So, with a heart full of courage and determination in the crumbling remnants of his home, Oliver pushed open the door to the unknown, stepping boldly into the shadows, the echoes of his past blending with the secrets of his present. He would find his family, he would confront whatever lurked in the shadows, and discover the true heart of the mystery that had enveloped his world. As Oliver moved cautiously toward the source of the whispering, his heart pounded like a war drum in his chest. Each step felt heavier than the last, as if he were wading through unseen vapors that wrapped around his legs and made it difficult to walk. The air felt thick and cloying, filled with a strange tension that twisted his insides. A chill settled deep in his stomach, like ice, and his instincts screamed at him to turn back and run. But despite that fear, a pull like a magnetic force drew him deeper into the shadows of his home, a home that now felt transformed into something grotesque and haunting. The whispering sound grew louder, swirling through the corners of the house like a sinister melody that crept along the walls. It wrapped around him, tugging at his ears with its ancient tone. "Come closer, come closer." The walls seemed to beckon in a voice that was soft yet commanding. Oliver stopped, frozen in place, his breath hitching in his throat as he glanced around. He was desperate for something, anything familiar to anchor him in this unfathomable nightmare, but all he found were shadows and eerie silence. The air was electric with dread as he stepped tentatively towards a doorway at the end of the hall. It looked like a gateway into the unknown, standing ominously just before him. The room beyond was cloaked in darkness, its edges blurry and unfocused, as if reality itself was bending. With trembling hands, Oliver flicked the switch on the wall. The bulb flickered momentarily, sputtered, and finally died, leaving him in total darkness. The only thing that broke the silence was the relentless rustle of whispers that crawled across the walls like 1,000 tiny creatures skittering around. Shadows danced wildly around him, stretching and contorting like tortured spirits, ensnaring him in their clutches. His heart raced like a wild bird trapped in a cage as he fumbled for the doorknob, an unsettling sensation wrapping around him like a cold blanket, making him feel like something alien was lurking just out of sight. Oliver pushed the door open a crack, and a dreadful gust of cold air rushed into the hallway, carrying with it a heaviness that threatened to steal his breath away. Inside seemed to emanate a presence so weighty, it felt like it was seeping into his very being, trying to claim him. Then, as if the whispers had suddenly found a voice, they dissolved into a blood-curdling laugh that echoed hollowly through the room. "You shouldn't have come back," it sneered, weaving through the air and snaking into his ears like poisonous smoke. Oliver felt his heart plummet into a dark abyss. The hairs on the back of his neck prickled, and a chill ran down his spine as the shadows began to coalesce. They twisted into warped, unimaginable shapes, all of them intent on watching him, as if they were waiting for something. Panic surged through his veins, making him feel like he might explode with fear, but he forced himself to stay rooted to the spot, desperate for understanding. How could this be happening? This was his home, his safe place, where he had spent countless hours creating adventures and glowing memories. As the shadows shifted restlessly around the room, a flicker caught his eye. It was a mirror hanging crookedly on the wall, its surface jagged and covered in dark smudges. Curiosity mixed with dread, drawing him closer like a moth to a flame. Oliver stepped forward, his feet feeling oddly heavy, as if he were walking through thick mud. As he peered into the glass, his reflection twisted and morphed, presenting a haunting version of himself. His image stared back with hollow eyes, lips moving in a mockery of silent screams, as if trying to warn him of an unseen danger. But the voice he imagined was drowned out by the sinister laughter that echoed around him. "Join us, Oliver. You belong with us." The whispers emerged again, sounding almost like a beautiful song, a soothing hymn with a dark twist. It was a cacophony of voices that flowed into his thoughts, wrapping around him gently like tendrils, pulling him deeper into their embrace. Confusion and fear clawed at his mind, and he staggered back, clutching his head as the sinister invitations swirled relentlessly, attacking his sanity from all sides. With a sudden burst of adrenaline, he stumbled back into the hallway, desperate to escape the heavy grip of the shadowy room. He needed to find his family, to discover what had happened to the life he knew. Each step he took felt like it was pulling him further into the whispers. The walls cried out in a torment that threatened to absorb him entirely. The atmosphere thickened with every second, trailing oily shadows that slithered about him, wrapping around his ankles like vines, trying to hold him down. Suddenly, the echo of footsteps rang out behind him, sending a jolt of cold fear shooting through him. Oliver turned, his breath hitching again in his throat. A figure materialized from the darkness, its form hunched and grotesque, its presence radiating malice. This thing resembled a human but was not quite. Its body seemed to twist and distort under a cloak of shadows, writhing as if it were made of swirling mist. "Why did you come back?" it growled, its voice a guttural rasp, each word dripping with venom like poison. The tension in the air crackled like static electricity, and Oliver felt himself trembling, terror wrapping around his heart like a vice, squeezing tighter and tighter. The chilling, disjointed reality of his home was too disconcerting. He couldn't stand it any longer. He bolted, racing toward the front door, each frantic step echoing through the forsaken halls, drowning out the horrible sounds behind him. The thing pursued him, moving oddly, its shapes fluid yet disjointed, a disturbing dance with death in this endless, empty space. Oliver could hear its lungs drawing in heavy breaths, deep and guttural, filling the emptiness around him with dread. He reached for the doorknob, heart racing, but found it stuck, refusing his panic-driven attempts to escape. It felt as though the walls were bending, constricting around him, trapping him inside this nightmare, a moment where escape appeared impossible. His fingers clawed at the door, feeling every cold, hard surface under his fingertips. Just as he felt the cold touch of death brush against his back, the doorknob finally twisted in his grip, and the door flung open with a loud creak. Stumbling out into the yard, he gasped for the fresh air, trying to fill his lungs with the normalcy of the outside world. But as he stepped outside, he felt different. The world seemed to twist under his feet. Shadowy figures lurked just beyond the tree line, their hollow eyes watching him with insatiable hunger. He stumbled into the fading light of the evening. The sun struggled to slip behind the clouds, disappearing and plunging the world into deepening darkness. Every rustling leaf seemed to whisper secret messages, and he could feel their eyes on him, always watching, always waiting. He looked back at his home, the very place that once felt safe, and now it looked more like an evil giant, looming over him, waiting to swallow him whole. His heart thundered in his chest as terror seized him. What had happened? Why did his home turn into this sinister being? Where were Mom and Dad? With nowhere left to run, Oliver took a deep breath, steeling himself. He knew he had to find them. There had to be some kind of secret hidden amidst all this chaos, a clue that might explain what was happening. With determination hardening his resolve, he stepped back from the door, feeling the heat of the whispers lingering still. "I will find you," he whispered to himself, a promise that echoed stronger than the darkness surrounding him. Oliver turned, facing the uncertain path ahead. The shadows shifted around him, and in that ominous twilight, he took his first steps into the unknown, driven by a hope that flickered like a stubborn flame refusing to be snuffed out. As he walked, the shadows skittered along the ground, almost playful in their movements. Oliver felt an urge to run, to scream, but he pressed on. There were still parts of the yard he recognized. The swing set that swayed in the wind, the tall oak tree that leaned over like a protective guardian, its leaves rustling softly. Those things were still there, and maybe, just maybe, his family was still there too. Each step he took felt like stepping into a mystery that needed to be solved, a puzzle that had lost its pieces among the shadows. He could still hear the faint whispers, encouraging him to go further, to seek the truth. It was like a riddle, and he was determined to unravel it, no matter how frightening it became. Taking a steadying breath, Oliver scanned the yard, trying to find something that might lead him to safety. Suddenly, he noticed a faint glow coming from behind the old oak tree. His heart raced as curiosity gripped his mind. It was a sign, he thought, maybe a light in the darkness. "Mom? Dad?" he called out hesitantly, his voice shaking slightly. He approached the light cautiously, every instinct on high alert. Was it just another trick of the shadows? Or could it be something real? Clutching the hope tight in his heart, he moved around the tree, and there they were. A soft, warm glow pushing through the darkness, inviting him closer. The whispers faded momentarily, replaced with the sound of soft, gentle laughter that wrapped around him like a comforting blanket. Oliver peered around the tree, and as his eyes adjusted to the light, he gasped in astonishment. Sitting there in the world illuminated by that soft glow was a small, radiant garden of flowers and plants, each petal shimmering as if sprinkled with fairy dust. The bright colors fought against the dark surrounding them, boldly blooming despite the grim shadows that loomed nearby. There, in the midst of the flowers, he saw two familiar faces. His parents were there, laughing, their smiles bright and whole. "Oliver!" They cried out in unison, their arms reaching for him like a magnet drawing him back into warmth. He dashed toward them, joy swelling in the pit of his stomach, drowning out the fear that had been balling up inside him. As he reached them, enveloped in their embrace, everything seemed to shift. The darkness receded a little, the shadows pulling back, retreating from the light. It felt like love had pierced through the cold grip of fear, protecting them. "We were so worried, Oliver," his mother exclaimed, her voice filled with relief. There was worry etched on his father's face, but he, too, looked grateful. The familiar scent of home wrapped around him, making his heart swell with happiness. "We need to leave this place," his father whispered urgently, glancing at the shadows that still lurked in the distance. "They want to take you away." I heard the whispering. "The walls, they turned against me," Oliver cried, the fear creeping back into his voice, but this time it was mixed with hope. "But I found you. I knew if I kept looking, I would find you." Drawing strength from his parents, Oliver knew they could face whatever was left together. They were a team, a family, bound by love and bravery. The warmth of his family hugged him closer than any shadow could reach. Hand in hand, they faced the darkened horizon, determined to find a way to reclaim their home and banish the whispering walls forever, ready to confront whatever challenges lay ahead. Together, they could face anything. Together, they would find their way back to the warmth of the sunlight. Trapped between the unholy presence of the house and the ravenous shadows lurking beyond, Oliver found himself in a realm of despair. The world beyond his sanctuary had turned murky and twisted. It was as if the colors of the sun had been strangled by the encroaching darkness, leaving everything dull and lifeless. Scattered clouds drifted lazily in the overcast sky, and the air was thick, carrying an unsettling stillness that made his heart race. The vibrant greens of the grass seemed to fade into a sickly shade, and even the flowers that once bloomed brightly now hung their heads low, as if they were experiencing sorrow. Oliver turned back toward the hollow house that stood menacingly before him. Its empty windows now seemed like gaping maws, waiting to consume him whole. They looked darker than before, resembling eyes that gazed hungrily at the world outside. The shadows inside beckoned to him with an alluring whisper, promising things lost and lives forgotten, stirring feelings deep within him that he didn't quite understand. The air felt thick with memories of laughter and light that had long since faded. He took a step back, but it was as if fear had wrapped its icy fingers around him. Just then, in the distance, that dreaded laughter echoed across the yard, rising and falling in a way that chilled his thoughts and sent icy fingers of paranoia creeping up his spine. Resolutely, he turned and sprinted down the path, desperate to put as much distance as he could between himself and the malevolence of his home. With each step, the ground felt shaky beneath his feet, as if the very earth itself was trying to send him back. Oliver glanced around, and everything seemed different. The trees beside the path twisted grotesquely, their branches clawing up towards the sky like dark, demonic hands begging for release. The once friendly trees had taken on a sinister life of their own, their bark twisted and knotted, appearing almost monstrous. The leaves rustled ominously in the wind, whispering secrets that snagged at his consciousness like a web, trying to trap him in a snare of fear. They told stories he couldn't quite comprehend but felt heavy in his heart. Every heavy step he took felt like the shadows were drawing him back, wrapping around him like coils, pulling him toward the house he had tried so desperately to escape. It felt like a giant, mysterious hand was forcing him to confront the looming darkness that lay beyond those doors. Fear coursed through him, turning his legs to lead. Suddenly, a distant scream pierced the suffocating air. It was a sound of terror, a wavering cry that echoed through his mind, intertwining with the whispers of the house. It sent a jolt of panic through him, and he stumbled, almost falling. What was that? Who was in danger? His instincts told him to go back, to face whatever darkness awaited him instead of running into the unknown. Taking a shaky breath, he forced himself to turn around. His heart raced as he ran back toward the house. The door loomed open like an enormous mouth, ready to swallow him whole as he crossed the threshold once more. Nervousness prickled his skin, but he pressed on, feeling an invisible force urging him to step further. Inside, the air felt charged with energy, tinged with an unsettling malevolence that wrapped around him like a heavy blanket. The walls seemed to pulse with anticipation, almost alive, rippling with shadows that flickered in and out of existence. Even the familiar outline of his living room seemed different now. It appeared distorted, the outlines blurred, as if viewed through a warped lens, creating a world that felt both real and unreal. The furniture, once comforting and familiar, had transformed into grotesque shapes, resembling broken carcasses, lying in wait for the right moment to pounce. A sofa that had once been soft and inviting now appeared cracked and weathered, sighing under the weight of despair. A table was tipped on its side, and shadows danced across the floor, creating an eerie atmosphere that made his skin crawl. Confusion clouded his mind as shadows flitted past him, glimpses of figures twisting and melting into one another. They danced along the walls, their features obscured and shifting, mocking him with hollow laughter. He felt small and vulnerable, surrounded by a cacophony of whispers that seemed to echo everywhere. "You belong to us now, Oliver. You won't leave again," they chorused, a chilling symphony of sinister deception that wrapped around him tightly. With each step deeper into that haunted realm, Oliver fought against the creeping fog of despair that threatened to swallow him whole. There had to be a way out, he could feel it lurking just beyond his thoughts. Suddenly, an overwhelming urge invaded his mind, the need to reclaim his life, his family, and to fight against whatever dark enchantment had bewitched his home. As he stood in the center of the living room, trembling, a shadow detached itself from the wall. It moved toward him, menacing and cloaked in darkness, creeping closer with every heartbeat. "You think you can escape? You are part of this now," it hissed, elongating its malformed limbs, reaching for him with gritty fingers that seemed to stretch endlessly. An icy dread surged through Oliver, paralyzing him momentarily as he took a step back, but the walls swayed and shifted, closing in on him like a predator about to strike. Panic threatened to overwhelm him, but he gritted his teeth, summoning the last shreds of courage he possessed. Fighting against the creeping despair, he shouted out, "Where are my parents?" His voice echoed through the room, each word ricocheting through the cloying atmosphere, dampened by fear. His heart raced as he waited, breath held, for an answer amid the burgeoning darkness. For a moment, silence reigned, thick and heavy, making him feel as if time had stopped. Was this the end? Would he be trapped here forever? Oliver held his breath, heart pounding in his chest. The shadows shuddered, and suddenly they grew more animated, swirling wildly around him like a storm of darkness, encircling him like vultures around carrion. "They're here, Oliver," the voice whispered, smooth yet filled with wicked delight. They welcomed the darkness. They did not resist. Each word dripped with malice, wrapping around his heart like a vice, squeezing tighter with each syllable. A mix of horror and despair boiled within him, the realization settling in that perhaps he was the last remnant of light, the last hope fading into the ether. The shadows encroached closer, smothering him, leaving only the weight of despair pressing down like a heavy fog. "Join them, Oliver," the shadows beckoned enchantingly. "Become one with us." The atmosphere vibrated with their sinister invitation, a chorus that sang to the very depths of his nightmares. "You will never be alone again." He gasped, feeling the cold hands of darkness tightening around him, threatening to snuff out the flickering light that remained within his heart. Every breath came harder, and he could feel the panic rising within him. He could still feel hope somewhere deep inside, a tiny flame flickering against the overwhelming darkness. He thought of his parents, their faces, their laughter, their warmth. They could not be gone. "No," he shouted defiantly, "I won't join you. I won't give in." His voice struggled against the heavy air, but he pushed through, clinging to the thought of his family. The shadows recoiled momentarily, as if his words were a burning light cutting through their enveloping darkness. With renewed determination, Oliver took a step forward. "I will find them. I will wake them up." The shadows swirled back, angry and confused, but he pressed on. He could feel the power of his hope as he pieced together the fragments of courage he had left. He pictured his parents' faces, the love they shared. It was a shield against the darkness trying to engulf him. The malevolent energy around him seemed to hiss in frustration. He stepped deeper into the living room, the warmth of memories glowing inside him, a beacon against the night. "You won't win," he yelled, more forcefully this time. The atmosphere shifted again, shadows wailing and retreating, as if they feared the brightness he carried inside. Oliver managed to breathe, that tiny flicker of hope becoming a roaring blaze. It felt like he had pushed through a barrier, breaking through the thick, suffocating darkness shrouding him. With every ounce of strength, he ran toward the door, determined to escape the malevolence that enveloped him. He wanted to burst through into the light, to leave behind the twisted realm where shadows whispered sweet nothings. They could no longer fool him. He would save his parents and reclaim their home, no matter the challenges that lay ahead. The door was almost within reach. The shadows writhed angrily, reaching for him with claw-like hands, but with a fierce shout, he flung it open and stepped back into the world. The cool air hit his face, fresh and clean, washing over his skin, and for the first time in what felt like forever, he could see the colors of the world returning. Flowers brightened, the grass shimmered with life, and the sky even seemed to lighten. With the darkness behind him, Oliver knew he would face the shadows once again, but now he had the strength to fight. He would not be consumed. He was not alone. He would find a way to bring his family back and free them from that malevolent house once and for all. Oliver stood at the edge of something very frightening. He felt like he was on a cliff, and if he took one more step, he would plunge into a hole so deep that he might never come back. This hole, however, wasn't like any hole you might see in the ground or in a play area. It was dark and swirling, filled with whispers that seemed to call out to him. Oliver couldn't see anyone, but the chilling sounds wrapped around him, as if they were fingers beckoning him closer. They promised relief from all his pain, a promise that felt hard to resist. His heart raced as he looked around. The shadows seemed to dance on the walls, twitching and squirming like they were alive. They moved and twisted in a way that made Oliver shiver. Each shadow seemed to wave at him, inviting him to join their party in the dark. They whispered sweet, tempting words that said he would finally be accepted. You could almost imagine them saying, "You don't have to be alone, join us and you can stay here forever." But forever in darkness sounded more like a nightmare than a dream. Oliver could hear laughter, but it wasn't the kind that made his heart happy. Instead, it felt sticky and thick, creeping into his ears and making him uneasy. It filled the air like an old, rotting fruit that had been left out too long. He tried to shake it away, but the sounds pulled him in, drowning out the thoughts that usually made sense. His heart was sinking, and he could feel the bright hope he had slipping through his fingers like sand on a windy day. As Oliver staggered back, feeling more lost than ever, the voices became louder, clamoring all around him. "You can't escape, Oliver. You are one of us now," they sang, their words twisting together to create a creepy song, one that made his skin crawl. The shadows were everywhere now, creeping around him like a heavy blanket that wanted to smother him in its darkness. It was as if they were hungry for him, wanting him to stop fighting and give in. "Aren't you tired of fighting?" one voice whispered softly. It sounded almost friendly, but Oliver knew better. It wrapped around him like a cold snake, squeezing tightly. "We will be your family now. Come back, Oliver, come back to us." The words echoed in his mind, each one hitting harder than the last. It was as if they were a storm trying to knock him over, and he felt dizzy, as if the ground under his feet was shifting like quicksand. Breathing became harder as the atmosphere thickened with an eerie weight. The shadows lunged forward, wrapping themselves around him like a dark tide, pulling him deeper into a pit of dread. The world around him twisted, everything blurring and swirling with the shadows, making him feel like he was caught in a giant whirlpool. Everything seemed to spin, and the sense of time slipped away. He wanted to fight, to run, but it felt as if the shadows had claimed his strength. "Your parents welcomed us willingly," a cruel laugh rang out, echoing around the room and filling him with unbearable shame. Images of his parents flashed in his mind, memories of love and laughter danced before his eyes. But now, those very memories felt tainted and twisted by the darkness. Why hadn't they fought harder? If they had let the shadows in, why should he be any different? A wave of despair washed over him, heavy and cold. All that was left in his heart was a smoldering ember of defeat. But below the surface of all that despair was something else, a sudden surge of anger. It rushed through him like a volcano about to erupt. How could they, the shadows, think they could take everything from him? He clenched his fists, feeling a fire in his belly. Slowly, he stood a little taller. "No," he shouted, his voice trembling but determined. "You will not take me." It seemed to stir something in the shadows. They began to writhe more violently, angry at his defiance, and for a moment, Oliver felt hopeful. But with that hope came a chilling realization. He had no idea what would happen if he gave in to the darkness. Would he lose himself completely? Would he forget the smell of his mother's cookies or the sound of his father's laugh? He didn't want to abandon his memories. The shadows loomed closer, and their laughter grew louder, echoing off the walls in a haunting symphony. It was beautiful yet terrifying at the same time, like a song that you couldn't seem to shake no matter how hard you tried. Each note seemed to tug at every part of him. The darkness felt like it was wrapping its cold hands around his heart, squeezing tight. With all the strength he could muster, Oliver took a step backward, almost tripping over himself as he fell to the floor. He gasped for air, his breath coming in quick, desperate gulps. The shadows swarmed around him like a fierce storm, pulling at his thoughts, trying to shatter his resolve. The last thing he wanted was to turn into part of the darkness, something devoid of any light or cheer. "Join us," the malevolent voice cooed, smooth and inviting, like a haunting lullaby. It tried to soothe him, but the allure was a trap, hiding the darkness lying in wait. He could sense it wanting to consume him whole. "We only want to help you," the voice teased with cruel delight. The icy fingers of fear gripped him, twisting his stomach into knots. Oliver cried out, trying to reach for the fading remnants of hope, but it felt like trying to grasp onto smoke. The shadows closed in around him, eager to wrap him in their suffocating embrace. They wanted him to give in, to forget the sunlight, the love, and the laughter that existed outside of this horrifying nightmare. The laughter was all around him now, echoing in the corners of the room, drowning out his thoughts until all that remained was a hollow emptiness. "Embrace us." The voice slithered through the air, a silky whisper that curled around his mind, tempting him even more. "We can free you of all your pain. Just let go." He felt himself trembling as the shadows surged again, their presence overwhelming. Perhaps letting go was the easier choice, the one that would stop the noise and the suffering, but it also felt like surrendering to despair. It was as if the whole world weighed down on him, pushing him deeper into an abyss. Outside, the leaves rustled softly in a cool breeze, a stark reminder of the world beyond his dark prison. But to Oliver, it felt far away, nearly unreachable. The final rays of sunlight disappeared behind heavy clouds, and the house stood silent, like a guardian watching over the encroaching darkness. Inside, however, Oliver's cries melded with the whispering walls, becoming part of a fragile tapestry woven from fear, sadness, and a hint of regret. The hollow house, with all its secrets and sorrow, hungered as it watched him, devouring his past, his dreams, and the flickering warmth of his spirit, feeding on everything he once held dear. The laughter echoed softly in the distance, promising that the empty house would remain forever, a waiting trap for the next unwitting visitor who might wander through its shadowy thresholds. With each passing moment, Oliver felt himself slipping further away from the boy he once was. He felt like a ghost in a forgotten world, lost and alone. His heart raced as the whispers hummed louder, drowning out all memory of light and love, ensuring that darkness would continue its dance of despair. The shadows lingered, eager to entice someone else into their ghastly waltz. Would any other child stumble into this forsaken house? Would they too become a part of its eerie symphony, lost to the world like he was? In the quiet aftermath of his surrender, Oliver felt the last flicker of hope guttering out. Once more, he struggled against the creeping shadows, wishing desperately to escape. But the deeper he fell into their embrace, the more he felt something in him slipping away, the final chapters of his story fading into the darkness, leaving nothing but the darkness that craved more.